Hello and welcome everybody, I'm oneproudbavarian and we are going to have a big and important piece of news right here for Victoria 3 and the upcoming DLC. This one will be about the ship designer, it will be about the flagship, and it will be about trading ships, templates, and in general just things that you should keep an eye on. I will let you know about all of it and we're gonna discuss it here as we always do, but I want to be clear, every piece of content here will be in the DLC. So we're past the free patch, this is something that you will find in the DLC only. If you haven't picked it up yet, if you haven't picked up the game or the season pass or any other Paradox game, use the link in the description. I get a commission, you're helping me out directly, and you're picking up the game that you want. So everybody's a winner here. And so without further ado, let's just jump straight in, because as always there is quite a lot to talk about. This one was written by Lino. Today I will go over the central mechanical features of the Great Wave, the ship designer. Also, we'll talk about flagships, a smaller feature but cool nonetheless. And lastly, about ship purchase treaties. To be clear, all of which I described today is part of the Great Wave expansion, like I told you. Let's start with the ship designer. Our ambition for the Navy and the ship designer in particular was always to make it a matter for your strategic ambitions, and not to get lost in the details with tactics for individual battles. So when we sat down for the design of it, we know we wouldn't want to replicate a ship designer as players might know it from Hearts of Iron 4, for example. So if that was your fear, I think it's safe to say that that is not what we're going with. Instead, we're focusing on a more Victoria-appropriate design, where you make the big picture decisions instead of deciding how many flak guns you'd like to have on your cruiser. This is really important. Hearts of Iron 4 has an incredible ship designer, but it is set in one war, a singular piece of war, and that's it. You make shipbuilding decisions that last for years and that make up like a quarter of the entire runtime of the game. In Victoria 3, 100 years. If we get lost in the micromanaging of ships, especially in the optimization of ship layouts, A, the AI won't handle it, B, it will be boring and annoying in multiplayer, and C, most importantly, I think it will be incredible amounts of micro for not too much of a gain. So basically what they're doing here, I think, is the right approach. Now let's continue. While doing so, we still wanted to improve upon historical accuracy a bit, add flavor wherever we can, and even accounting for abstractions, come up with something that is historically plausible. In order to try and achieve that, we had a long-running consultation over multiple sessions with Drakenfell. Drakenfell, amazing YouTube channel, you have to check it out if you care at all about boats. Who runs a YouTube channel and a podcast almost entirely dedicated to naval topics, much of it taking place in the 19th century. He has been instrumental in providing us with a lot of necessary information on all things to do with the ships themselves, from finalizing the list of different ship types with us, to providing good references for what ships to model ours after, all the way to what different ship modification levels could look like given our constraints, and even the soundscape one would expect to hear. We are really happy to have had him on board with us, and he has done a tremendous job working with us. I love that they got Drakenfell on board here. I think, again, amazing, rooted in academia, incredibly interested and dedicated to the topic. This is how you make this a good game mechanic, really, ultimately. Now from there, let's talk about the elements of the ship designer by talking about ship modifications. Ship modifications modify key stats of ships and are the tools you use to build a fleet that serves your strategic purpose. The attributes that are modified directly are armor, damage, speed, and supply capacity. Armor, of course, determines how robust your ship is. Here we want to make it very impactful compared to the past, when steel hull ships are introduced. Historically, they made wooden ships pretty much obsolete immediately. This is, you would not believe this, the one complaint that I have heard a million times whenever we played multiplayer, because effectively, yeah, when I show up in any metal gunboat, you die. You die if you're in a wooden ship. That's the way it is. And they have chosen an approach here, and they're not really going into detail just yet, because next week will be all about the actual battles right there, right? But basically, they have chosen an approach where that is something that can be felt right away. Armor being insanely important. We represent this by adding armor values to them that are high enough to block most attacks of the wooden ships, completely changing the progression of ship's power in the game. You can see right here, basically you have a proper cutoff point. The moment I bring in my metal ship, you are very unlikely to do any damage whatsoever. This is the right approach, to be clear here. This is how easy, how simple, and how guaranteed a victory with a metal ship would have been and was. But it also, of course, came with a lot more responsibility, because all of a sudden you couldn't just sail. Supplying that navy, maintaining it, came with a much higher cost, but the value that you gained from it was absolutely significant. Damage is armor's counterpart and is, as you may have guessed, simply deducted by armor values of the opponent's ship. So basically, if we look at this right here, I can't see the... oh, there it is. The armor is 25. If I have an attack of, let's say, 50, we would be looking at a situation where I do 50 minus 25. You end up with 25 damage per tick. That is at least how I interpret this right here. Speed determines the traveling speed on the world map. Supply capacity is used to determine how much supplies a ship can carry, allowing it to stay disconnected from the supply network for longer if necessary. This is massive in my opinion, especially if you do not have global fleet hegemony, because that will mean that, much like the Germans did in the Pacific when World War I broke out, you can have a navy that remains semi-functional for at least a few months, if not longer, if you had the supply capacity to maintain this. You will be cut off. You won't be able to make it home. You won't be able to get new supply onto that ship, but you can still be a menace on the open ocean for quite some while. To modify these stats in the ship designer window, you can simply choose individually between 3 levels for each stat: high, medium, and low. Depending on the ship type, those can mean different things, though, of course, which we display as flavor text underneath the category. That's cool. I like this Napoleonic framing right here, right? Then we have sappings braced hull, and we have iron reinforced hull. This is great stuff. Take a look at how the armor goes up massively here, man. That is actually incredible. You know, I'm thinking about this now. 35 as the highest attack is actually not that high. I wonder what the actual battle calculation is. Now, the one thing that I do want to point out here, and this is deeply, deeply important, all of these stats have an immediate purpose that we can assign. Armor and armament obviously directly oppose one another. You are saying, hey, can I afford to fight somebody that has a decent set of armor? In that case, you need good armament, and vice versa. These make sense. Why you would invest a lot in them really checks out. Because, you know, thinking about it, of course, you're just going to lose the battle, you're going to lose the fight, even if you have a bigger navy, if Britain just rocks up with high armor and armament levels. Supply capacity also makes sense. I can immediately see the usage case right here, because ultimately all we're looking at here is, of course, the fact that how long can I stay out on the ocean, wreaking havoc, being a bit of a menace, getting the navy of my enemy to not just kind of blockade me, to not just hang around my coastline, but rather hunt me down. Well, supply capacity is going to be the thing that deals with this. The one thing that is a bit curious, and I bring this up because when you have a ship designer, the one thing that you cannot afford to have is, of course, well, the question of trap options. If you have trap options, it's not a real option. Nobody will ever use it other than noobs who are falling into the trap, and that option might as well be struck out. I want to point out propulsion here. Think about it this way. If you have a good armored ship and a poorly armored ship, they don't really screw with each other. They do their job respectively as well as they can. Propulsion, since it determines your speed on the map, the weakest link determines how fast that fleet will be. What this makes me think about here is, are we looking at a system where I make basically a general choice where I say I want a fast navy, so propulsion up for everyone, or I want a slow navy, so propulsion down? Or are we actually looking at something like, for example, on my average navy I might have, you know, just middling speed, but then the submarines and everybody related to the submarines, you know, destroyers and whatnot, are in a position where they actually have very high propulsion. Even if the fleet that they might be a part of can't be as fast as they could be, in wartime, I might split them off and send them off to convoy raid, that kind of stuff. If they implemented this right, this will look fantastic. If they didn't implement this right, then propulsion will virtually never be really useful. You know, you won't really bother because, yeah, it'll take like a couple of weeks later to get somewhere, but who cares? That's not going to do the damage that would make you invest more in this stat. Now, I'm not sure about this, but I bring this up because this is vital. The ship designer will only be as good as there are as few trap options as you possibly can have. The least convincing one from my perspective right now is speed. The worry that I have there, and this is a little bit abstract, so you know what, let's wait for the later weeks, but basically one of my worries there is as well that speed kind of inherently will mean that I send my submarines into a C node, the enemy slowly but surely moves in and then is in the C node, and I just pull my submarines out. The biggest worry that I would have is that propulsion speeds lead to a cat and mouse game that would be incredibly click heavy and super annoying. These are my worries here, but other than that, the ship designer options that we have here make a lot of sense. If you're not in a global navy situation, if you're not interested in supply, for example, you go low here and you go high on these. If you're a global empire, you need to max all of these as much as you can, and then for particular roles of particular ship types, obviously you're going to have different setups as well. This is the right amount of ship designer modifications that you can have. This is no Hoi 4, but it's also not as primitive as it might have been in other cases. Upon changing a ship modification level, the 3D preview window will show the change accordingly, showing, for example, more or different types of guns on the ship. See the 3 images below for a demonstration of the progression. This is amazing. Let's take a look at this. So we have this ship. This is all low. There are no wildcard mods. More on this in just a second. Boom. Look at the difference right there. You see this? The color of the actual material that changes. Of course, the engine changes. And I think lastly we see... Do we see a difference in guns? I see more ammunition lying around, I suppose. Oh yeah, no, I do see the difference right here. Here it is, yeah, look at that. There you go. And then, of course, the last step. Yeah, that is a big turret right there. That is a gigantic turret without a doubt. Ooh, it's nice. I think the art team, as always, is the art team. Victoria 3 suffers from many things, but it is not ugly art. I love looking at this game. We can, of course, also actually see the increase here, right? So now, moving on, of course, these visual changes do not only apply on the preview window. They will be visible wherever this ship is going, on the 3D map, including battles. In general, we have put in a pretty good amount of effort into better representing your fleet in the world. When you zoom in closer on a fleet, the ship representing your fleet will unfold and display more ships. These ships are proportionally showing your fleet composition. If you have a large percentage of dreadnoughts, your fleet will also be composed of those, for example. We'll likely show that off in the art depth area as well. Really, this is the first time, oh my god, the first time maybe in my entire era of doing YouTube videos where I'm excited for an art depth area. I need to see all these ships. Let's come back to the ship modifications. Changing one of these stats can also implicitly affect another stat. For example, improving the propulsion of a ship will also improve their detection capabilities, which allows them to engage enemies more easily. Yeah, so like I said, you would have, your main fleet would have standard propulsion, and then you would have, for example, destroyers, you would have submarines. They want to have very high speed, not only because it makes them faster on the map, again, but also because we're looking at a situation where we can actually go and hunt these ships down. Now, I will tell you again, I hope missions are not based on just individual nodes, because that could become very bothersome in, like, how you assign missions, how you reassign a cat and mouse, but in general, of course, it makes a lot of sense that if you are very fast, you have an easier time sniffing them out and finding a way to engage them. This, however, can also incur negative effects. If you set the armor value of your frigate to high, it will come at the expense of speed, for example. You can counter it by setting speed to high too, but this will further increase the production cost of the frigate. Because generally, true across all ship types is, increasing a value will also increase production and maintenance cost of the ship, whereas lowering it will make it cheaper. Makes perfect sense. Therefore, the main balance to pick between will be dependent on your country's situation, and will be between armor damage versus speed supply, and generally effectiveness versus total cost. But we wanted to add something else that reflects the increased design complexity when trying to fit all this thick armor and big guns and supplies and propulsion onto the same ship. Let's talk about ship design complexity. The cost to build a ship, and therefore also its maintenance costs, is scaled non-linearly, super important, with the levels of that ship modifications. For that, we count how many ship modification levels are applied to the ship in total, low representing 1, medium 2, high 3. Each wildcard slot, which I'll get to, also counts as 1. When those values are multiplied with the base cost of the modifications with some exponential growth bit sprinkled on top. With the current values, this results in all medium ships being roughly twice as expensive as all light, ones of the same type, and all high being again twice as expensive as an all medium ship configuration. These values are placeholders, as always, but I wanted to give you an impression of where the journey is roughly going to go. Since this is a very important aspect of constructing your fleet, we have this graph displayed in the ship designer to showcase this exponential cost increase, also sporting a new icon for ship construction point costs that caused some confusion on Steam previously. This graph is amazing. We need more of these graphs where you can very easily tell. I can imagine that any game can actually benefit from this. Ship complexity is currently 8, right? So 1, 2, 3, 486 ship construction, due to ship modifications, 8 levels times 50, and 86 from ship complexity. For this, we also added a new piece of tech to highlight a node on a graph, causing it to display a tooltip. We'll likely make use of this in the future in other graphs across the game. For now, only this one. First of all, this graph is amazing. Giving you a very quick understanding of how you're doing on the exponential curve is just amazing. I will also say that I think it's the right approach. To do something exponentially well, basically it's the 80-20 rule. You can get 80% of the result with 20% of the effort, and everything thereafter will be much more costly. The marginal increase of use that you get out of going further in these units might not be worth it. If you can afford it, like Britain, if that is your entire state of being, because if your island gets cut off from the empire, you die, maybe you still want to go there. You want to get the extra out of there. But it shouldn't be linear, because linear would make it too easy, basically, to compete with anybody. This is one of those things where they correctly recognize that the marginal increase that you get in utility here is something you need to deal with. You need to make that decision, and it will become very, very costly very quickly. And I would argue that the biggest, the most complex ships will only be something in, like, basically the home fleets, right? I hope that we're going to have home fleets. That's one of those big topics that I will get to later. And then simultaneously, we're looking at a situation, of course, where it's really only going to be the great powers, right? You don't need to do this stuff. If you don't want to compete with them, then you can invest that in, for example, economic growth. Who had heard of that before? Economic growth. Now, here comes great news. If you were wondering, whoa, there are so many modifiers, what if it gets a little bit cluttered? How do I keep track of it? The answer is templates. In order to make any ship designer effective, you need to be able to construct both cheap frigates focusing on efficient supply consumption, as well as heavily armored frigates with high firepower. That is what templates are used for, to save your own setups and construct different versions of the same ship type. A template is determined by a ship type and all selected ship modifications for it. To create a new template, you press the according button in the list of templates when choosing what ship to construct. Alternatively, you can go to the Navy tab in the military panel, where you will find the Create Ship Template button that will also take you to the Ship Designer panel. Take a look at it right here. Add template, you can choose right there. Then you choose ship of the line, you even see when it was modified, and I would assume silver means the middle ground. This is basically where you were with all of the ship modifications. All ship types have a full template set up from the start of the game, featuring the medium level ship modifications in all 4 groups. Yep. This in turn is also the list of templates that you will have available to you if you don't own the Great Wave. But it also serves the side benefits that if you really don't want to engage with customizing your fleet, you can simply stick to the default templates. 2 things. First of all, I like that if you don't get the DLC, everybody gets this ship reworked system, but on medium. This makes it relatively easy to balance, actually. The difference between no DLC and DLC is big because you don't get that customization, but fundamentally the game will be balanced around medium efficiency. Everything else is then going to be addressed depending on what kind of metas develop within the community. That's nice. The second thing is, I really hope the AI can handle ship modifications. I really do. If they can't, that would be horrific news. Absolutely horrendous. A template has a name, which you can change, of course, to make it easily identifiable. This name will also be repeated in all other relevant places in the interface that are referring to the template that a given ship is based on. Super duper ship of the line. Of course, 4 ship of the lines of the base template and 14 super duper ships of the new template you created. I like this. I wish we maybe had even these icons still, right? Like, so that these icons were here. Although I'm not sure, depending on how the battles work, of course, we have to kind of consider, you know, like what information is actually valuable before I engage in a battle. Because this will be the screen, make no mistake here, that you will see right before you engage in a battle, right? So, clearly it appears that damage and armor are the defining factors right there. You can see decommission here as well. Reset, I guess that is just like in how you edit it in what you add there. Select all, change template, and retrofit right there. So we know we can decommission and retrofit as well. Now, creating a new template is not the only way to navigate ship designs. You can just as well edit existing templates if you want your frigates to get big guns, for example. So they are already getting now to a point where they are detailing, hey, what happens if a ship is no longer actually up to date? What do we do about it? Once you edit the template of a ship that has been constructed already, all ships of that template will be marked as being outdated. To apply a change in an existing template, a ship or group of ships has to be given a specific command to return to port and get it installed via a shipyard. The costs for this action depend on the modification. For example, if the armor needs to be improved, the construction cost in terms of goods, time, and ship construction points depends on the specific cost of the armor rather than the whole ship. Starting an upgrade/refitting process creates an entry in the ship construction queue like regular ship construction would. Once completed, the ships in question will return to the fleet. Take a look at it right here. We can see it right with, if you select all, you can then retrofit them. Other than that, you can do this with these buttons right there, and then you can actually get that done. The arrows are not only indicating a possible change in the ship's template, but also act as the button to send an individual ship to be retrofit. Right, makes sense. I got nothing against this. This is good quality of life. Yeah. It's a good organization. What do you want me to say? Now, something that I wish they had talked about a ton more is wildcard modifications. Sadly, only a tiny segment right here. Last but not least, I want to quickly mention the wildcard modifications. Depending on the ship type, you can install a few wildcard options into your ships. These can be used to provide a particular specialization to a ship template in order to shape the role further. Wildcards range from something like patrol boats, which increase the ship's blockade strength, to medical stations, which reduce the crew damage suffered in combat, to fire suppression, which reduces the damage of critical hits it suffered. Many of these only become relevant for the more modern ship types, and generally the bigger the ship, the more wildcard slots it will have. Each wildcard option you use, of course, also increases the construction cost for the ships as outlined before. Alright, that's it on the ship designer, I think. I want to stick for just a second about wildcard modifications right here. I want you to keep an eye on this and keep this in mind. If we have a functioning system, these wildcard modifications in play with the DLC will be huge. They will be massive because they ultimately communicate your overall actual strategy for the big wars that you're looking forward to. If your strategic enemy is Russia and you will keep clashing with them over and over again, you need specific fleets to blockade them to make sure that they cannot escape away from, you know, their cold water ports there that freeze over during the winter. You need to ensure that, and you need to have a fleet structure. If the conflict between Britain and Russia is actually just Britain and Russia forming one doomstack each and then clashing and then you win and then you blockade them, these wildcard modifications are not worth it. What I'm saying here is basically keep an eye on this. You will be able to tell very early on whether this system is working correctly, whether it is working well, by simply looking at whether wildcard modifications matter, whether you are just doom stacking for most damage and then once the ocean is clear, you go down and you spread out. Without going into too big of a tangent here, it is a bit of a complex topic, but basically what I'm suggesting is I love wildcard modifications, being able to specialize my fleets, and I can also see, or I could see, that some wildcard modifications could only become apparent. Don't think that is in there yet, but they could only become apparent and available to you if you have gained that insight. Let's say you had a battle, for example, where submarines sunk so many of your supply ships, all of a sudden you're learning about a different type of deployment that is eligible for a different type of ship. Boom, knock that wildcard modification in there. Why would you apply this? Why would you employ that tactic, I should say, or this modification, if you've never encountered that particular circumstance? I would love to see a little bit of a comeback here of what Victoria 2 had in terms of inventions, right? That would just randomly trigger, basically, but weighted, but more interesting, and more related to what your actual activity on the ocean is. That is not what we're getting here, to be clear. But this is kind of the starting potential there, and this is also a good indicating mechanic on whether the system is complex enough or whether we just end up doomstacking as we are currently in Victoria, right? So that is very, very important to keep in mind right there. Now let's move on to a super cool topic, and that is, of course, flagships. Flagships are a special status which symbolizes the pride of your fleet. Your entire navy can only have one flagship at a time. Designating one of your ships as your flagship is easy. You can choose any of your existing ships, be it the most modern and badass ship, cough, HMS Claudius, cough, or the oldest ship that serves more of a nostalgic purpose. It's up to you. To do so, you open the individual ship panel of the ship you'd like to assign this special status. On the bottom, you will find the Assign as Flagship button, which is all you need. Let's take again at this. We see crit chance, yep, classic stuff. We're going to learn more about this, of course, next week with the screening, visibility, detection, and so on. Assign as Flagship. There it is, yep. Go on, you know you want to press that shiny button. As last time, the textures, of course, are not final, right? Take a look at this right here. The art dev diary is going to be grand. Congratulations, now you have a flagship. In the same ship panel, you now get some options to customize the figurehead of your flagship. Sadly, I can't present the options yet, since the 3D models for them are still in development by your art team. What do you think we have as options as figureheads? I like the idea. I want to see something really good, like something fantastic. In comments surrounding the last few dev diaries, I also saw some interesting suggestions for additional customization, which we will consider for after the release of the update. What was that, I wonder? Maybe even just the hull itself? Who knows? But what about the actual effects of flagships? Well, first of all, the presence of a flagship in a fleet increases the involvement that is being generated by this fleet. Involvement, as a reminder, is the value that you will need to increase to reach higher levels of interest in a strategic region, as outlined in our dev diary. Furthermore, the presence of the flagship in naval battles plays a role, specifically the outcome of the battle. If your flagship is present during a successful naval battle, you will earn some deserved prestige for your country. But the opposite is also true. If your flagship is participating in a lost battle, your country is going to be made fun of at the expense of some prestige. And beware of your flagship being sunk in battle. The shame of suffering such loss is a painful one. I hope, long-term, this will impact a lot more than just prestige. Prestige is nice, and hopefully prestige also plays a bigger role in many other ways, like colonization and whatnot, than it currently does. The weighting there is something that really should be increased. But I also hope that if you lose your flagship, for example, it could have ripples on your naval military academy. Wink, wink, military academy. I also, of course, do hope that we're looking at a situation where this could have an impact on your elections, on your politics. Lose your flagship, that's a massive piece of shame for your entire nation, and your government is discredited. I would like this. I think it would be really, really cool. You could see some interesting flips purely through kind of pride levels that have been hurt. The flagship status or presence in a fleet is presented in relevant places with this cute crown icon. You know, I can even see that this would have a huge case in driving up revanchism. When it comes to a mechanic that isn't currently in the game, but that they've talked about in the past, I think this could play a big role right there, right? Revanchism being kind of motivated by the sinking of the flagship. You can see right here, I like it. We see the crown right there, and we see the crown next to the proper ship as well. That's cool. Now, next up is a difficult topic. Ship purchase treaties. I say difficult because it's not really what I was hoping for. Let's take a look. I would like to start with a note on ship commissioning, where you order a ship to be built by another country before it actually exists. We would of course have liked to do that, but it was simply not feasible. The added complexity for this is many times more time consuming. Apart from needing to add foreign entries into your own ship construction queue, which is to this day a source of bugs in foreign investment, one would have to come up with custom code solutions for all of these questions and more around its edge cases. What happens if the shipyards in the commission country get destroyed or occupied? Can you deprioritize an entry you got from another country? Is that breaking the treaty? If so, what happens in that case? What do you do with a half-finished ship entry if that treaty is nullified? Do you switch it to the building country's ownership? Do you have to crew the ship to ferry it to its target destination? I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like this was written for me, okay? Because I really wanted ship commissioning. It played a massive role. And I will also say that I mean, listen, I believe in the, hey, it would just take too much time to implement. I get this. But these edge cases, I think you can find answers for. I don't think that these are too difficult to answer either. This makes me a little bit sad, because this should have been and could have been such a neat way of very naturally basically offering something to a market, in this case your ship construction points, offering it to nations that you are specifically friendly with. If you have like a little list, friendly nations, all nations, no nations, whatever, right? I really wanted that as a tool of extended diplomacy. Now the treaty option exists, and we're going to learn about this a little bit more in a second. I just think that this could become very clunky and cumbersome due to the way that treaties are structured. It takes such a long time when an AI sends you a treaty to look at that treaty and to take it in, and frankly, oftentimes those treaties I say yes to because they're kind of inconsequential. They're not that important. When it comes to a ship, I need to look at that ship, I need to make sure that I can actually be willing to give up that ship. Basically, solving everything through treaties means that I can't clearly communicate my intent for, hey, these ships I'm open to sell, these ships I'm obviously not open to sell, because they make up the backbone of my fleet and I would have to build a new one to actually, you know, kind of make this worth my time. The way that I see this is that, hey, I'm happy that we have any level of ship purchasing and ship trading in the game. I think that is a good thing. I foresee this being a primary issue for usability. I don't think that the plausibility, the realism and whatnot being kind of put to the side here is too bad. I think that is okay, because yes, it would be hugely influential if I produce all of the ships that Brazil uses against Argentina, for example. Brazil should know of this, and they should be much, much closer to my sphere, and Argentina might be kind of slightly put off because I'm collaborating with their rival. But ultimately, you can still kind of do this via treaties. Treaties give, of course, an impact. Treaty articles give an impact on the sphere, the power blocks, and so on. So I don't think that that is that important. But, and you're going to see this in a bit, it feels slightly unwieldy. I have one suggestion here. It's not going to be implemented because we're too close to launch. At least that is my guess. But I really wish we could do that. Anyway, I hope you can see that. Unfortunately, it's a bit more complicated than simply granting another country their ship construction points. Therefore, this was out of reach for us. Fair enough. To compensate for this lack of ordering, we're making it so the AI will try to produce a small extra percentage of ships compared to how big they'd like their fleet to be, so that there should be enough options for ship purchasing. So, let's talk about what we're actually offering instead, since some people in the comments of previous dev diaries have asked what you will do with your outdated ships, for example, your wooden ones when steel ships are being established. Well, you can always decommission them, and maybe better answer will be to sell them to other countries. These might still be interested due to their own technology or those of their rivals lagging behind, or simply because they are desperate. Of course, you can also sell your most modern ships, either because you don't fear this coming to haunt you, you want to support a trusted ally, or simply because the other country is having a particularly deep pockets. In all cases, you will make use of the new ship transfer treaty article that you use like any other. For this, we have made it possible to target ships as tradable objects. Previously, this was limited to goods and states. When you select it, it opens a list of all ships you or the other country owns, which may be useful if you're dealing with great powers. First of all, this modifier list sucks. Obviously, this is terrible. I wish I could see the actual stats here, you know, like these stats, but, you know, like in a better kind of visual delivery, but that's besides the point. That's not what my issue here is. This way, you can add as many or few ships as you would like. Just like any other treaty, it can be composed of different articles as well. For example, to get some money or investment rights in the target country. Right, take a look at this. Yep, Diadem, Alger, HMS Bahram, and so on and so forth. And then you sell them. I don't see any AI weights right here. I see a minus 177 for this one, so maybe these aren't configured yet. I'm not sure. It being 0 is obviously nonsense. Hopefully they have enough weights in there, but that's really besides the point. What makes this system potentially cumbersome and absolutely annoying is that even if you have AI weights, how do you communicate to the AI what ships I am willing to sell? And how does the AI communicate that it has enough ships, that it has built enough and is willing to sell as well? If I have to go into this interface and then I click on the Navy and then I see, oh, willingness is minus 1 million because I don't have enough ships of my Navy to be over the top percentage there, that would suck, right? The way that I would like to see this is that essentially as you are in your Navy interface, you have a choice where you can say, hey, this one is for sale, this one is for sale, this one is for sale. It would end up with me creating a navy, or a fleet I should say, that maybe does like a minor mission somewhere else and is a rotating garbage fleet. Every now and again, a buyer can come along and pick something up. Every now and again, I might have to be aware that, yep, I'm selling ships from this navy. If I don't have the option to mark this, the AI will send me offers for random ships that might currently be extremely necessary, so I can't sell this ship right now, and have to now go into the negotiation and manually modify what ship I want, instead of the AI from the very first moment requesting a ship that I want to sell anyway. This also works in reverse. Like I said, if I'm in a position where Britain is running around with the navy, they're in an important war, maybe they still have enough ships to sell ships. How does the AI know, hey, wait a minute, this ship is currently in the navy facing off Germany, and this navy is somewhere in Argentina, completely unnecessary to stick around. Having no way of declaring I want to sell ships sucks. The quality of life here is probably going to be quite annoying, and you are going to have to work with this feature. Ideally, there would be one window basically that says, hey, all of these countries currently have ships that they're willing to sell. Then you look around and you go like, oh yeah, look at this, Great Britain, I have great relations with them, I can buy their ship. Whereas Germany also is willing to sell, but they have bad relationships with me, which of course means that they're less likely to give me the ship. I go to Britain, I check out what ships they have, I click them, and Britain immediately, and I know, we both know, they want to sell these. Vice versa would work exactly like this. Doesn't mean that there should be a ship market per se, but an indication for where there are ships that I can actually sell, and so that the AI knows that I am willing to sell certain ships as well. Without that, I fear that any offer that I get from the AI is going to be super annoying. I would probably only really sell ships by initiating a treaty to sell them, so I would be the one initiating, and that is one-sided, it is boring, it is lopsided. Yeah, my biggest worry here isn't down to, oh, we don't have ship construction in a foreign country. Yeah, it kind of sucks, but it's not that different from the fact to, hey, I just sell you the ship and then you get that ship. Same dependence, you get the same impact for influence because of what we're looking at when it comes to treaties and such. Yeah, I understand this part. I'm just saying that with the way that it seems to be organized, I have to go through this list before I can even tell whether a nation in the very first place is willing to sell any ships. If we had instead a global overview or an overview of my friends who are willing to sell ships, and then I know, oh, I can go in there and I know that I can buy one, and vice versa, again, the AI also knows it, that would be way better. Marking ships as sellable would be a tremendous thing, and I would really, really like it. I think that would be amazing. Anyway, doing this via treaties is cool. Nothing wrong with this. I do really like it. So yeah, that is all I can say right there. It isn't the same as commissioning ships elsewhere, but having this feature makes it so that it basically is the same, because you're still tied to that country via this contract, giving them some influence and so on. I just fundamentally feel like the usability here will be a massive, massive pain. Now, and this was everything for this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about the biggest and most important change and update coming in the upcoming DLC. We are talking, of course, about naval combat, and Tunai is going to tell us about it. I hope that that feature is good, because this will be the defining element of this entire update. Will my naval strategy feel good? Will I just be doom stacking? Will I be in a position where the battles are understandable and yet interesting because of the modifications I can do? Will it just be kind of boring? Nothing about this DLC and update matters more than an answer to that topic, and I will tell you all about it next week when we get to it. For now, I will see you later, alligator.